Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this morning on functional service providers and the model that we have to show how to take something like this from strategic to tactical. Just for logistics purposes this morning, I will go through the presentation, and at the end of the presentation, then we will open up the floor to questions and answers. My name is Bill Van Nostrand. I am the head of client relations and alliances for ClinActis, which is a CRO out of Singapore and in Asia. And also on the call today is Dr. Christophe Tournier, who is the founder and CEO of ClinActis, which we will describe a little further once we get into the presentation. So without further ado, let's start, please. So just for background purposes for everyone, this webinar today is about the term functional service provider, or FSP, as some people may know. Now, the difference between functional service provider and something called preferred provider agreements with major pharmaceutical companies and biotechs is that the preferred provider agreement is usually done by major farmers who are looking to choose 1, 2, 3, or 4 global CROs to conduct their clinical trials on a global basis. And those are usually models that are dedicated people, FTEs, to perform those services all over the world. And the difference here that we want to talk a little bit about today for the functional service provider is twofold. A functional service provider is someone who provides a special service on either a geographic area or in a tactical area, such as a therapeutic approach, whether it be oncology, neuroscience, respiratory, or any of the other therapeutic areas. And then the last thing is having a specially trained or local people that have deep domain knowledge of the area to which we reside. Next slide. So just a little bit of background on ClinActis. We are a full service CRO. We provide the services to virtually the whole industry with the pharmaceutical, medical device, nutrition, biotech. And in fact, we either provide services to other global CROs that are not there in the geographic area, in particular APAC, which we're talking about today. It was established in 2009, and we're headquarters in Singapore. Our value proposition is that we are a multicultural company. The team is able to communicate effectively internationally with countries specific. So whether it's Malaysia, whether it's Thailand, whether it be Japan, whatever it may be, that those people are native within those countries and know the customs, know the rules, know the people. We are exclusively located and focused in Asia-Pac alone and have been for many, many years. We have solid expertise in applying all the international quality standards, but doing it on a regional basis with that expertise. We use the flexible approach to the scope, budgeting, and contracting process. ClinActis is a Far East CRO committed to implementing international ICH GCP standards in clinical trials and the ability to deliver high-quality results. Many of the studies that we do, if not most, are used as a part of FDA or EMEA filings on a global basis, where we are the regional CRO within APAC delivering those patients and that information. Our senior management is fully accountable to the quality and deliverables to our clients. What is our mission and our vision? Well, as I mentioned before, we're headquartered in Asia, and all corporate decisions are made within the region, meaning APAC, in order to better anticipate our clients' needs and adapt to the local rules. Our vision is to become the reference CRO specialized in conducting clinical trials in APAC and offering certainly quality services and yet being cost effective. We strive to employ people with a genuine expertise in that region all the way to a local level with a passion for excellence to work with our clients the most proactive way and to build relationships based on trust, transparency, and strong ethics. Our mission is simple, is to provide our clients with unique and dynamic expertise in applying global drug development standards to the specificities of each country in Asia Pacific region. I'd like to talk a little bit first about Dr. Christophe Tournier, who's our founder and CEO. Dr. Tournier has been in the APAC region for more than 20 years. He's done clinical research in both Europe and Asia, but specifically has lived within Japan, China, and India, working with many different biotech and pharma companies and clinical research organizations. After completion of his medical studies in Paris, in various hospitals in France, Dr. Tournier spent a period of 3 years at the National Medical Research Institute of France in the field of antiviral or HIV products. That institution is equivalent to the National Institutes of Health here in the United States. His introduction to the pharmaceutical industry became medical director for a U.S. biotech company in the antiviral or anti-HIV area. He then moved to Asia to begin his career out there or in the APAC region by working for a large CRO, opening up their operations, clinical operations. Those two CROs were both Parexel, opening up their West Coast or East Coast operations, and PharmaNet, and opening up clinical research offices in all the various countries, mainly Japan, China, and India. He also opened up Sanofi's offices, a major pharmaceutical company, helping them facilitate their research in the APAC region. Most recently, Dr. Tournier was vice president of a large CRO, which was, as I mentioned before, PharmaNet, which is now a combination of Inventive and then INC, and it's called Syneos now. And that's when he decided, after leaving them, to start his own CRO. Next slide. The next person, senior in the company, is Dr. Paul Lim, who has a master's degree in clinical pharmacology. And the value that he brings is 15 years of clinical operation experience in the APAC region. Most recently, he was head of clinical operations for Bristol Myers Squibb. So he has deep domain expertise in the oncology area, which is one of our strong points in terms of therapeutic areas. Now, why Asia? Why now? Why ClinActis? During the early 2000s, Asia generated a lot of hope for drug companies in terms of clinical research capabilities. Although the market is broken into various regions, meaning that Japan is where most people have gone in, over the years and been there for many, many years because it's its own market segment, one of the largest market segments in the world. Everyone is interested in China now and opening up offices within China because China primarily does their research intra-China at this point in time. It wasn't until recently, in October of 2017, that China allowed outside data for early development to be submitted into the country to the CFDA. And that's the good news. The challenge is that there was only 6 sites outside of China, 4 in Taiwan and 2 in Hong Kong for the early development trials. And then the rest, it's really the rest of China, Asia at that point in time, because it's a combination of Korea and Taiwan, both of which are very westernized in their approach to clinical research and meet all ICH GCP standards. So many people looked, when they're outside of Japan, to go to Korea and to Taiwan. The interesting thing for us is that we have, as an organization, and Dr. Tournier as management and founder, developed people and attracted management people who had strong ICH GCP certified background and training. Most of our people, if not all, came from previously from biotech companies or CROs or pharmaceutical companies. And our people average 7 to 10 years in experience. So Dr. Tournier was very smart in developing not only local expertise, but domain expertise. We follow the FSP model. By following the FSP model, it allows our clients to choose their trials by therapeutic area for one study or multiple studies in a single country or throughout all of APAC. Through an accelerated study startup process with our people, our extensive investigator network, and our contract library facilitating fast enrollment. We have two main networks in APAC. One is for oncology, where we have over 75 sites. And the second one is CNS, where we have over 100 sites throughout all of APAC. What makes these sites unusual is two things. Number one, they are all ICH, GCP compliant. Number two, all those sites have been audited either by the health authorities in those countries, the FDA or the EMEA. And number three, most of those sites have physicians running the programs there that have been trained in the United States, but that have gone back to Asia. So they have that Western knowledge of how to conduct clinical trials. So what we see here is the real definition of functional service provider is having operational therapeutic expertise with a local footprint. And we do that in really two ways. One, in a strategic partnership offering, which is based on geographic reach, the use of our local people, and the use of our full services. The second is the strategic partnership models, and they can be broken into three ways: non-dedicated resources, dedicated resources, and the last one is flexible, which is a combination of dedicated and non-dedicated. Our experience is second to none. We have 33 years experience in clinical research in that area of the world, which is as much or more than anyone else. We have 27 years specifically in APAC, covering all the countries as far south as Australia, New Zealand, and as far north as Taiwan, Korea, and Japan. But we get to a lot of the smaller countries such as Indonesia, Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, Hong Kong, and Singapore as well. And critical to many companies from the West is having the ability to get within China itself to do trials. We have an extensive knowledge of the regulatory framework. Dr. Tournier, having been there and lived there for more than 20 years, knows most of the regulatory organizations. As I mentioned before, we have the best KOLs because many of them were trained in the United States and are now practicing in the Far East. And these are sites across all the region. They're not specific to Japan. They're not specific to China. They're in all the various APAC countries. And we have strong therapeutic expertise, mainly in oncology, CNS, infectious disease, respiratory, cardiovascular, endocrinology, and pediatrics. So we have done an extensive mapping process throughout all of Asia over 20 years to know exactly where those patients are for your trials, which helps us as an organization in an FSP model to get up fast and going in those trials, mostly within a accelerated time period of 90 to 120 days. So what about the geographic reach? You know, Asia is the growth force. The economic growth remains strong in the Asia-Pacific markets. According to PricewaterhouseCoopers, the Asian market is growing 10 to 15% per year as compared to 5 to 7% in the G7 countries. I had mentioned to you before, but we'll go over again, the reach we have within APAC. And that's starting with the southern part of Australia, New Zealand, working to China, Malaysia, Hong Kong, India, even going into India, Indonesia, the Philippines, Singapore, South Korea, Taiwan, Thailand, Malaysia, Japan, and Vietnam. So what are our services? I mean, we act as a full service agency in that part of the world. And sometimes we are just a extension or an arm in working with other CROs because they're not able to find the sites or the patients in that part of the world trying to deliver global development services for their large pharma clients. Majority of our clients are biotech companies, smaller companies, where we act as their full service CRO in that part of the world. And for big pharma, under the functional service provider guidelines of just being in that region of the world and maybe just offering oncology services as an example. But we have clinical project management, regulatory, logistics is a very important thing within this part of the world of getting drugs and labs in the country and out of the country. Site management is critical. It's one of our strengths because we have direct relationships with not only the PIs, but the CRCs at all those sites. Our monitors are incredibly experienced, 7 to 10 years. As I mentioned before, they come from other pharma companies, biotechs or CROs. We have a temporary clinical staffing reach or arm as part of our non-dedicated flexible group. All our people, as I mentioned before, are ICH GCP trained and certified. Data management, we are capable of doing it electronically or by paper. I would say 85 to 90% of all our charters are electronic at this point in time. And we have worked with all the various EDC data capture tools to be able to do that. We have medical writing and consulting services. Dr. Tournier is as experienced as any other MD and head of a CRO in all of Asia Pac than anybody, having been there for so long and practiced in all the countries. So what is our research strategy in this functional service provider model? But what we want to do is go from strategic all the way down to the level of tactical. In the planning process, we start with the large pipeline that the pharmaceutical or biotech company may have, and we get it down to something study specific. We look at the contracts are usually voluminous, and we streamline them down to something very simple. In the staffing model, it can start as a shared and go all the way to a dedicated. In project management, you look at tasks, and then you have to look at who the resources are going to be. How do we save cost and time? Well, it can be hourly, but then we have to break it down to a resource. And finally, in the systems, we are a CRO, but we can use the CRO's systems or the pharma systems or the biotech systems, or we can share something. So we're very flexible in these models, as you can see. So how does our partnership models and structures work? I mean, this is traditional, but these are incredibly important. So there's 3 layers. There's the executive oversight layer that looks at the client partner sponsorship and the executive level all the way to Dr. Tournier as the CEO of the company. The operations level is all the way from the head of clinical operations from a pharma, biotech, or CRO down to dealing with Paul Lim, our head vice president of clinical operations. And then the last one is the project delivery team. And that's a combination on our side of both central at the senior level and all the way down to local. And local can include both project management and intra-country, and also the CRAs are all local. So under the functional service provider management plan, to effectively develop and manage the partnership, a management structure must be defined to include the following. Under the management team, has to be strategic management team, as I mentioned before. Those people are responsible for the day-to-day activities for a particular study or group of studies. The operations team, which is Paul Lim's team, they're responsible for the segment of outsource, both the functional aspect, the therapy aspect, and the phase 1 to phase 4, whatever it may be. The senior management team, those responsible for finance, outsourcing, and business strategy. You have your local deployment of CRAs, and you have country-specific project management. Under the management tools, we have the same management tools as anybody anywhere in the world. We start with an Alliance manual guide. We have our in-place operational plan. We have our performance dashboard, and we have our web portal for all communication and reports, including the performance dashboard. The partnership models, we have three options, as I mentioned before. We have the non-dedicated resources, and this is a transactional relationship, project to project. We deal with, obviously, the request for proposals. In many cases, they're RFIs first and proceed to RFPs, and they drive the process. The services don't start until a signed agreement is in place. That doesn't mean that we don't do what we call the mapping of these potential sites and where these patients are. So when we get, just as an example, under a preferred provider agreement, we think we're special and that we're unique. And that when we have a request for proposal or an RFI, and we just have a synopsis, and we will take that synopsis and do a total evaluation of the entire APAC region and come back to our clients with an Excel spreadsheet within 7 business days. And that spreadsheet will have the following. It will have the countries specific to which we recommend doing the studies. We have the sites and the PI. We have the country requirements for how long it will take to get a health authority approval plus IRB approval. And then we will give our clients the breakdown of how many patients per month will be delivered as part of this trial. One thing you'll find about working in Asia is that the physicians, when they tell you they're going to give you 5 patients per month, they're going to give you 5 patients per month. Otherwise, it's a loss of face for them. Versus the United States will say, hey, I need 10 studies or 10 patients for this study and wind up with 1 patient 6 months later. That does not happen in the Far East. So we give resources or assign on a project-by-project basis, and it works well for limited outsourcing or short-term planning. The second is a dedicated resources, and these are the traditional, I would say, preferred provider agreement on a global basis. These are dedicated people that work exclusively for one client. And ClinActis is responsible for managing the dedicated staff, obviously. Customer provides regular resource forecasts to allocate the staff. There is a consistency in a dedicated team that allows efficiencies, flexibility, cost savings, and domain knowledge. So by having a dedicated group of people that work over, let's say, a phase 3 project that may be multi-site, multi-year, having those same people interacting with the customer is incredibly important because they literally become a part of the team. This model is most successful given a sufficient volume of work to outsource and advance planning, meaning that there would have to be either a long-term study for many sites in many countries, or it would be multiple studies that are follow-on. In other words, you would start with a phase 1, maybe in 1 or 2 countries with several cohorts, and this would proceed into a phase 3, which then would proceed into, heading for approval. And then the last one is the flexible resource, and that's obviously a combination of both non-dedicated and dedicated to maximize flexibility and contain costs. This is a graph that just kind of outlines how the planning under a flexible model works. And so that you can see in the dark areas, month by month, are the dedicated staff. The white bar area within the bar show the non-dedicated staff, and then the dots going up and down show the actual FTEs and how they may change from month to month, and that you're able to move up and down according to resources and according to the amount of work that's being done on a monthly basis. So under functional service provider relationship benefits, what are the benefits? Well, first of all, it reduces overall drug development costs. And I think this is incredibly important, especially to the biotech companies that are managed by venture capitalists that pour their money into the company, and everything about them is time and money. And we are totally cognizant of that. And that is why we're able to start these projects up faster and complete it sooner. It saves in staffing, hiring, and human resource costs. It certainly takes advantage of local domain knowledge, which you really can't put a finger on in terms of the importance, because speaking a local language and having a local relationship with the CRC and the PI is incredibly important. We've seen over the years that many of our sites will use us prior to using a major pharmaceutical company or another major CRO because of their trust and because of the long relationships. This all reduces recruitment time and effort, as we'll mention and talk about upcoming. It saves time by reducing procurement workload because everything is standard, it's in place, there's an MSA, there's a contract, everything is handled in a statement of work process. It improves quality by developing consistent workflow processes and the team. It avoids downstream reintegration of data and queries. Your accuracy in managing your study budgets is more consistent. It accommodates natural attrition. Our turnover rate is less than 3%. So I think it's right up there or ahead of certainly large large CROs. And that has to do with the tenure of the people, the relationships with those people in all different countries within APAC. It's a consistent provider of services. Most of our business comes from repeat business because of doing a good job on the very first project that we're doing on behalf of a customer. ClinActis manages capacity and infrastructure needs depending on the workload, and it's an opportunity for role engineering. So what are some examples of what we've been talking about and the difference of using a preferred provider in a region of the world? We just completed a large global colorectal study, which we did a previous webinar on actually. And we were chosen as being the APAC CRO by this large biotech company out of Europe. They chose another CRO for Europe and they chose another CRO for the United States as part of a global trial. And what were some of the key results and lessons learned from this? Well, first of all, a majority of the submissions to the IRB and Health Authority were completed ahead of schedule. And when we say ahead of schedule, at least 90 days ahead of schedule. The first global enrollment was from Asia, 6 months before Europe and 12 months before the United States. The first patient was screened in Malaysia on January 5th, 2014, and then randomized on January 15th, 2014, 2 weeks later. Good teamwork, local knowledge, communication, coordination within the stakeholders are the most important thing in patient recruitment. And as I mentioned before, our pre-mapping of the countries where the patients existed was critical. And as a result of starting this study earlier than both Europe and the United States and completing it earlier than Europe and the United States, the client gave us another phase 3 add-on trial for colorectal. The second example of a key result is that we were also chosen to be a regional CRO within APAC. It was a global randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled phase 3 study in severe uncontrolled asthma with a global enrollment duration of over 2 years. 10 countries were involved and 75 sites in Eastern Europe, Middle East, North Africa, Latin America, and Asia. Our area, in particular Malaysia, achieved first recruitment 8 weeks after the sites were activated, and the Philippines, also our sites, did it within 6 weeks. After 1 year recruitment, global enrollment reached 63% of planned randomized target, with the Philippines and Malaysia as the second and third key recruitment drivers worldwide. So what were the results and lessons learned? We were the first global enrollment was from Asia. The first patient was screened and randomized in Malaysia. It is key to ensure that the study protocol or eligibility criteria takes into account international standards and treatment. And our knowledge of ICH GCP, having specific sites that are trained there with PIs from the United States, and knowing the local requirements of health authority, IRB approval, and having that CRA with 7 to 10 years experience with the relationship with that site is one of the key aspects of acceleration of these trials. So why ClinActis? Well, it really starts with our geography, where we are, who we know. And that's our people and the services we deliver, which are based on results. We have the most experienced team in Asia. The CEO has been there for 20 years now in conducting ICH GCP quality studies for not only other CROs opening up their offices, but a major pharmaceutical company. The management team has over 45 years experience. The CRAs average 7 to 10 years. Our clinical operations head is 15 years. And we have a deep domain knowledge of the sites, their patient databases, all the contracts. We have a library of the contracts of all the sites that we use throughout all of APAC, including the CRCs and the principal investigators. We're trusted relationship with the health authorities and the sites. It's interesting, in Asia, a CRA or a project manager in a local country can literally pick up the phone and call someone in the regulatory department to talk about a clinical development plan, any of the background clinical development, preclinical data that a pharma company may have, including toxicology, as we prepare for a submission, and get back responses in time period and other data needed before making a decision. You can't do that in the United States. You can do it in Asia, which just gives you a tremendous, not only relationship, but accelerated study startup time period. As I mentioned before, we have over 82 ICH GCP compliant oncology sites throughout APAC and 90 CNS sites that are compliant with, that are staffed by both neurologists and psychiatrists. We're just completing right now a 300 patient dementia Alzheimer's study in record time. And it's all being done as part of a global study and submission, which we're going to then get a follow-up study on as well. Many of our sites, as I mentioned before, have US trained PIs. The accelerated study startup process is due to our library of site relationships, contracts, and processes. So we have all those documents in our library, which saves a lot of time with procurement and sourcing of the biotech company in completing those documents. Our phase 1 trials, we also do phase 1 to phase 4. Our phase 1 trials are virtually in every APAC country as part of global submissions at substantially less cost and time. So in Asia, there's not what you would call the traditional standalone phase 1 units. Those phase 1 facilities exist within academic centers or major hospitals, but you have to know which ones are carved out, which ones are dedicated, which ones are experienced, and which ones have been audited by either the health authority, FDA, or EMEA to be able to do these submissions. And finally, we have a proven research model to accelerate new drug applications in China. That I mentioned before is that you literally can do these studies outside of China. And I say these studies, they're phase 1 studies, PK, PD, SAD, MAD, DDI, BE, type studies in 4 sites in Taiwan and 2 in Hong Kong that we have direct relationships with. We can do the study there, submit the data to the CFDA, and if approved, the savings is 12 months period of time for the pharma biotech company, and you could proceed from phase 1 to phase 3. And not only is that savings in time, but it's huge savings in cost for the companies looking to do that. We'd like to thank you for giving us the time today to listen to the preferred provider agreement. We are going now to take questions with myself and Dr. Tournier. Thank you very much.